Ex-prisoners of Reddit. What was the scariest thing you've seen on prison? So I had this friend I hung out with all the time when I was a teenager, and his dad had been to prison a few times. I used to go over and drink, smoke weed with my friend and his brothers, and sometimes his dad would hang out with us for a bit. One night when we were all drinking, he decided to tell us all a story from his prison days. When he was close to being released, he decided he wanted to do something nice to surprise his wife. So he cut his penis and put some balls underneath the skin and let it heal, with the idea that it would make sex better for her. Guess as a thank you for waiting for him and taking care of the kids while he was in prison. This was years later and he still had them in. I could have lived 1,000 lifetimes without hearing that story and been perfectly happy. Some years ago I was at high security prison for 8 months. One time we were walking to the rec yard. This one guy jammed a steel rod into the back of the guy in front of him. Blood coming out of his mouth like vomit. Having to walk by that dude, acting all casual not to cause concern from guards, was like an inauguration to adulthood. It wasn't something I saw so much as something I heard. Don't read if you have a weak stomach. This guy came in, very scary dude. He was openly a necrophiliac. The guy was doing time for desecration of a corpse. I was just a kid when this happened, so I was in the 1824-year-old block, known in many jails and prisons as the jungle. Kids in jail are young, curious, and refuse to believe anyone out there has seen or done worse than they have in general. So people started asking this guy questions, trying to call his bluff and get him to explain what he was really in for. He stuck to his story that he got caught fucking a corpse in a cemetery. So here's where shit got bad. They started asking questions and everyone realized he was dead serious, no pun intended. He explained to us that it's very simple to fuck a dead female body. He said you simply dig the corpse up, lubricate the anus, puncture if necessary, and slide a curling iron inside for 5-7 minutes. He explained the vagina's close proximity to the anus caused this to warm the vagina up and make it feel lifelike. He said any scarring or burning to the anus didn't matter, as this was all about making her feel alive while you needed her, and nothing else mattered. The utter matter-of-fact manner in which he explained it all, coupled with his jacket, papers showing what crime he was incarcerated for, showing he was in for desecration of a corpse. No one asked him anything after that. No one messed with him or got in his way. Not even groups of dudes ever messed with him. I saw some savage beatings, met some killers, rapists, armed robbers, truly scary, awful people. Nothing stuck with me like that though. 12 years later, I still think about that guy sometimes and get the creeps. This makes me want to be cremated even more. I'd say it's the time I was out on the exercise yard in Durham Prison, United Kingdom, standing against the fence talking to someone I know. In the middle was people walking round in a circle like normal. This guy steps out of the circling crowd and slashes the guy right next to me and steps back into the crowd. The guy looks at me and starts saying, "Have I been slashed? Have I been slashed?" Honestly, the side of his face was wide open. I thought I could see his teeth. I just exhaled and leant back against the fence, pretending I'd saw nothing. Nothing else I could really do, and I wasn't getting involved in whatever it was that was happening. Anyway, the alarms went off and the screws pulled him out of the yard. Another thing that wasn't scary really, more shocking but has stayed with me, was when I saw somebody hanging when I was in Northallerton Young Offenders. You had 3 landings floors on the induction wing. The bottom landing was used as the association where you went out for an hour a day and made phone calls and such. Anyway, I'm waiting to use the phone and a cell alarm went off on the landing above. A screw went to the door and starts screaming for help and opens the door. In your pad you had like a shower board, is the best I can describe it, that blocked off the view between the toilet and your double bunk. As I looked up I saw a lad hanging off it, pretty much blue in the face. The screw is grabbing him by the legs and trying to keep him up, and another screw runs in and cuts him down. Loads more screws turn up and they have him laid out on the landing doing artificial respiration on him. They put what I can only describe as some sort of shoehorn down his throat. There's mumbling and they carry him off, and I never saw him again. The prison was small, so if he was alive I probably would have seen him again. Honestly, prison is rife with mental health issues and just what I can only describe as a volcano of emotion waiting to erupt. I could honestly type many different stories, from rapists getting their head stoved in for a solid 30 minutes while a screw sits not even a meter away, to stuff like waking up to my pad mate screaming because he sliced his arm open and stuck a pen right inside it somehow, and the blood is everywhere like some sort of horror movie. Anybody who implies it's like a holiday camp is wrong. Not me, but this is a story that makes me shiver whenever I think of it. There's a guy who was in a large gang, went to jail many times between the age of 18 to his late 20. He's in his 30 now, has changed, left the criminal underworld, now travels the country, holds lectures to teenagers about his life, how if you're involved with gangs, seek help to get out, don't ever go down that path. The first time he went to jail, at 18 years old, it was night, he was trying to sleep. There was a loud scream that woke everyone up. Both guards, other workers ran to the cell where the scream had come from, where one inmate had thrown a liter of boiling cooking oil that had been boiled at the highest temperature for over an hour in another inmate's face. A worker there panicked, didn't know what to do. So this woman, I feel so bad for her, she had no idea what would happen, took a wet cloth, towel, put it on the man's face. When they tried to remove it, the man's skin flesh just peeled off with it. Pretty much his entire nose was ripped off, along with parts of his cheeks, chin, and eyelid and so on. Just hearing about it is horrifying. He's still alive. Last that the guy who told the story heard, the man has had several surgeries. Cosmetic surgeries. Is that what they're called? To get his face fixed. It's still horribly disfigured. Not a prisoner, but a former prison guard. One of our corporals got stabbed over 30 times with no one around to help. Blood spray had practically painted the office red. Amazingly, he survived, but never came back. Another officer got beat so bad he was unrecognizable, all for a stupid gang initiation. Only death during my time was a guy that was improperly restrained, in the dark, without a camera, and he choked to death because he was wearing too many clothes and had toilet paper in his nose because he knew the CERT Prison Special Forces team was coming to get him. My cousin at the mental health prison had some wild stories. A guy with his testicle on a spork, another would open his abdominal stitches and play with his own intestines. I could not imagine working there. Inmate who was suicidal and selling heroin ate everything and died. Another story, but this time the funniest thing I saw anyone do, not disturbing. Prank from hell. Dude had a cellmate who used to jerk it a lot. Multiple times a day, out in the open and shit, in a fifi. A fifi is a prison pocket pussy made by taking a latex glove from the kitchen, filling it with lotion from commissary, rolling your towel up around the glove, wrapping the glove around the outside of the towel, creating a seal. You then fuck the hole like a pocket pussy, but in jail it's known as a fifi. Dude collected a bunch of the hot peppers from his jalapeno ramen cups for like a week, then when his roommate was showering, he grabbed his fifi from under his mat, put all the peppers in, put some lotion on top so dude wouldn't see. A few hours later dude went to fuck it and had to go to medical and see a nurse. Someone super close to me was in prison, and it was scary for me too because he had been a cop and so had to go to a special prison with people that had to be separated because they were cops, mobsters, gangsters, and so on. At first he got visitors from multiple friends, but eventually I was the only one visiting him and he had very little contact from anyone, not even family. Then, when he got out, it was like he was a shell of the man he used to be. He was intimidated by people and cowered away from people, just in like the supermarket. It was so weird seeing a once confident and strong man turn into a timid and scared one. I was in county jail, not prison. Basically jail is to prison as college basketball is to the new Abak Ozgob. Less intense shit. Generally less intense people, but some are going to go on the be all-time great players, get sentenced to life in prison for murder lol. So I never saw anyone getting sexually assaulted, didn't see anyone get stabbed, none of that. A few fights. The scariest thing was when a new guy was put in my cell, which held 15 men total, and he had some crazy fucking staph infection on his foot. Shit looked like it was rotting. Like I wouldn't have been surprised if he could have just brushed the skin off at that point. You basically have to be about cleanliness when you're locked up because stuff like that will spread like a goddamn California forest fire. We basically forced the guy to stay on his bunk with his socks and sandals on until he got moved to medical, which luckily was only a few hours. The folks running jails don't want a bunch of inmates hospitalized with staph infections, you know. We all treated that bunk like it was the Chernobyl reactor for a few days. I've always wondered if the dude lost that foot. I guess the moral of the story is don't do heroin, and change your fucking socks. Probably not scary in the way you're expecting. My uncle did 5 years for armed robbery in Australia in the early 80s. He got hepatitis on shaving day. Periodically all the prisoners would be rounded up and forced to shave, one at a time. Same sink, same razor. No exceptions. The practice was eventually abolished due to acquired immune deficiency syndrome. He had plenty of fight stories and stories about beatings by the screws, but that's the one that sticks with me. I'm not sure what to call it, so I'm gonna anal spillage. A prison mate a few cells down from me got his anus destroyed, and for like 3 days shit blood just spilled out of his ass in random intervals during the day. Wasn't in prison, but I've been wrongfully thrown in asylum during an insurance scheme. I saw a kid get his hand broken for no goddamn reason. I saw people thrown in isolation and put in straitjackets just for standing in the wrong place, and worst of all, I saw a kid pinned down, crying his eyes out, screaming for help whilst being held down by 3 adults as a 4th administered a tranquilizer. Those places are cruel and unusual and have no place in modern society. This is my dad's story. When he was in his early 20s, he was a troublemaker. He dropped out of high school to drink and party all day and gained a reputation in his town for being a guy you shouldn't mess with. But he got sloppy. A guy wanted to prove that he was tougher than him. So the guy tried to smash a chair over my dad's head, but my dad smashed his ear off with a metal dustpan and continued to beat him until he was black and blue and passed out. My dad got arrested by the cops and was given a small sentence because he was attacked by a random guy he didn't provoke. The reason he even got a sentence in the first place was because he kept beating him after the guy was defeated. So into the slammer for a few weeks. They gave him a job. That job was peeling garlic by hand. My dad said he would do that for hours a day and said that it was the most mentally draining thing he has ever done. So I guess that's the scariest for him. Not me, but I got told this story a few years ago, and I warn anybody before continuing it is highly graphic. Rape warning. So there was a guy who lived in this foster system that my friend was in. He got sent to prison for raping his grandmother to death. Actually happened. I will try to find the news article. Rape. And when he got sentenced, a few inmates found out what he did and took him into the showers and proceeded to shove a wooden broom up his ass until it was gushing blood, then poured soap, shampoo and whatever else they could on the now tore asshole so that it would be harder to clean and heal. I think he died from some internal injuries later that day or week. Be warned, this is very gruesome. Probably the time a new inmate got stabbed 10 times in the chest by his cellmate and cut his head nearly off. Rumor was he knew his cellie before prison, and obviously they didn't like each other. Another rumor was that the prison set him up to be in his cell just so he could kill him. Wouldn't doubt it, as prison guards are just as corrupt and dangerous as the inmates. You hear all these suicides in prison when really it's a complete setup by the guards. This is why nobody is your friend when you're behind bars. Even the ones you trust the most will turn on you. This is also why you don't want to go to prison. A friend just got out a few days ago. He did 5 years in California on a level 4 yard, which I think is the highest. Snyway, he said while he was in there, a guy came in who was what they consider an affiliate. They aren't part of the gang, but have done things in the past to help and thus earned protection. So this quiet guy gets matched with a big ugly lifer, tatted to the gills, and with an anger problem. Well, after a few weeks after lights out, this big lifer starts picking on the little guy. No one knows what they fought over, but at head count the next morning, the commander looks in and finds the little guy smoking a cigarette with blood everywhere and nothing but a skull next to him. Apparently the little guy won, then removed all the organs and flushed them down the toilet. Then he cut big sections of skin and flushed those. Then the muscles, even the bone was cut up or broken and flushed. Then he had some Folgers instant coffee and a cigarette. My sister was a corrections officer at both the state and later the federal level. She said all the problems happened with the state facilities. People there were more prone to violence. Now for the scary part, she was in the command center one night, and she said this shadow came up out of the floor towards her, with its mouth open like it was going to swallow her. There was one cell that was notorious for paranormal activity. Especially annoying or violent prisoners would be shut in there to keep them occupied. She said they had this microphone system in there so the inmates could call for a cop-off when needed. More than once she said that different inmates would buzz and be completely in a panic, complaining of a shadow figure in the cell with them. She said that once she walked by a cell and saw an inmate laying down and there was a shadow person doing push-ups on top of him. My sister is very logical and doesn't believe in the paranormal. She can't explain the things she saw, though. It took her retiring before she could talk about it. Not me, but my mom worked at the prison for a bit. One time she told me about how one of her workers went to take a shower. He was a germaphobe, so he showed like 5 times a day. One time they told him not to do it. As he walked in, there was only one other person. The guy was in the corner with his eyeball hanging from his head. Was really shocking, the guy said. Even with that guy eye hanging, the other guys still showered. I don't know what happened after that, but sounds like it was messy. Okay, so I was only in jail for about a week when I was 17, and this has fucked me up. My cellmate, who by chance was my friend's ex, asked the guard for his sleep meds after I got my antidepressants, and she told him no because it was considered a narcotic and they couldn't give it to him without a direct doctor's approval. He takes the news well and goes to bed. Then, in the middle of the night, I woke up to him tossing and turning. He got and walked to the wall and stared at it for a minute, then screamed fuck and started bashing his head against the wall until he split his head open and blood was running down the wall. I got up and called over the guards. I got transferred to a new cell while they put him in a straitjacket and helmet, and when I got to my new cell, my new cellmate was just blankly staring at the wall, shuffling cards. I tried to make small talk and eventually asked him what he was in for, and he said arson and attempted murder. He was 14 and literally stayed up all night shuffling cards till about 8, 9 in the morning. I used to be a correctional officer in Singapore, where judicial caning is still used as a punishment for certain crimes and prison offenses. I never had to carry it out myself, but I saw it plenty of times. Among the inmates, they would act like they're not scared of it, it's not a big deal, and so on to save face. But privately, in the caning room, they're caned in private, not in front of other inmates. I've never seen anything that can make hardened criminals break down and cry like the cane can. For those who don't know, it's a lot more severe than Sharia whipping used in many countries. That is more for humiliation, while caning is for causing maximum pain. I saw grown men cry, beg, plead, throw up, even pass out from the pain. They have to keep a doctor on hand. Smaller offenders who got 3 strokes would be okay, though, after a miserable week or 2. Rapists who got the 24-stroke maximum, though, were never the same. Not me, but I know from friends in Africa that in their country, people caught poaching are often locked in a prison cell with a lion. Separated by metal bars, of course. The lion is usually one being rehabbed and has plenty of room to move around. It's a huge cell and 95% of it belongs to the lion. The inmate is put in a narrow strip against the wall. I thought that sounded like not much worse than regular prison. Because the lion can't reach you, but they said until you've been in there, you can't imagine how terrifying it is. When you're close enough to a lion to smell its breath and see its glowing eyes at night and can't get away. The lion's food and water is put right against the separation bars, so it spends a good chunk of its time voluntarily near the criminal. When it's there, the inmate can't get more than 3-4 feet away from the lion. Saw a dude everyone thought was a pedophile get bashed the shit out of. He had a bed sheet tied around his testicles, other end was tied to some bars, and he was thrown over the landing. He died. Did a short stint in a District of Columbia a few years ago. I had never been to jail before and had no idea what to expect. At lunch one day, one dude literally shanked a guy with half of a broken plastic fork. Just rammed the whole thing through his stomach. Wouldn't have believed it was possible to cause so much bleeding from a damn fork if I hadn't seen it firsthand. The rest of detention was uneventful, but I never looked at plastic cutlery the same way again. A plastic fork. Damn. At my school, a student lashed another student with just a ball pen. The guy who got lashed got 3 big-ass scars on his left cheek. Working in maintenance. I saw everything. Inmates committing suicide, inmates getting bashed to death, officers having sex with inmates, Officers having sex with other officers while on duty. Saw a female inmate being fisted like forearms sorta. A notorious pedo have boiling water thrown over him. Guys putting the inner of a pen up their penis. Cop worker had a used tampon hit him in the face. Had a female inmate break free of 3 guards and rush me. Had a male inmate sneak up behind me with a shiv. Saw an inmate roundhouse a guard and knock him out. Did intercept a drug ring by accident. By far the worst was seeing a muster head count. They had them line up on the yard. 2 inmates were holding a guy up. Like arms around him like mates sort of thing. They finished the head count. The 2 inmates let go. He fell like a sack of potatoes. Ended up with massive brain injuries. The shit I saw in juvenile doesn't even compare now. That place is fucked. My friend got locked up for 2 years for grand theft auto. Said a gang killed a guy for snitching by sticking a broom handle up his ass about halfway up and left him bent in half, ass up in a trash bin in the laundry room. Once saw a commander stomp the back of an inmate's head and watched the heel of his boot literally scalp the guy. Huge chunk of head meat and hair stuck to a black boot still sits fresh in my memory, yet it was 6 years ago. Saw a guy get hog-tied, had his clothes cut off of him, and was scrubbed with a toilet brush for refusing to take showers too many days in a row. Brazil. Once the lights went out, you'd start hearing scraping noises on the concrete. It was gang members sharpening their homemade knives on the concrete floor. Somebody was about to get killed when you heard that noise. Stuff straight out of hell. Some of the behaviors from those suffering from mental health issues were pretty disturbing. Inmates covering themselves in fecal matter or smearing it all over their cell was not entirely uncommon. Saw an inmate cover himself head to toe and also bite wounds into his wrists and pack those with shit. One inmate cut a testicle out and slapped it against the cell window when the commander walked by. Guy mixed scalding hot water and hair grease, set it on fire and threw it on a female officer. Didn't see this one, but a female officer got stabbed to death confiscating a pair of shoes. My relative Russia, Soviet times mafia, told me that one of his cellmates used a mug and a nail and hammered his scrotum to a chair just to get to the hospital to evade being killed. That's the spirit. A good friend's brother got out after serving 2 years. I asked him this question. Not the most messed up, but what I found most fascinating. He said he was forced to help some whites jump a big fat black dude in his cell. He said they went in and just started punching him all over. He said he punched the guy so hard in the side of the head that his eyeball popped out of its socket. My dad is a prison officer in a max prison in the United Kingdom. He says the worst is when a pedo is put with everyone else. Once the others hear about it, it's 100% guaranteed that the dude is going to be injured or killed, and the screws will take their time getting to them. He said the worst he's seen was a guy was put in for raping and killing a newborn. 20 minutes later the dude had been sugared. Sugared is boiling water with sugar dissolved into it so it's thick. Witnessed a few people being beaten or stabbed to death, but one of the more weird things was a guy that would inject his bladder full with fake urine in order to pass drug tests. He'd use a sports bottle filled with urine-colored water and force the nozzle into the tip of his cock, and then relax plus squeeze the bottle. Lol. Well, I don't know if you would call me an inmate, but I served time juvenile detention for fighting. But anyway, I was just eating breakfast and look over to see a kid around 10-12 stab another kid for trash talking him, and he just kept stabbing him. Don't know how he got the knife, but he killed the kid. I was imprisoned for a few months in Brixton Prison, London. My cell was at the end of the oldest wing of the prison, built in 1836. One night, in the early hours, I was awoken by a noise outside my cell. It was the noise of a guard walking by and sounded like he was banging his truncheon on the rails outside my door, like a kid does along a fence with a stick. It was really irritating, and I got out on my bunk and looked onto the landing through the porthole in my door, and to see which one of the assholes it was. I was surprised to see that there was nobody outside on the landing, though I could still hear the stick knocking. Next morning I mentioned this to some fellow prisoners, a couple of whom had also heard what I had. An officer nearby heard us and said, "Oh, that'll be old John up to his usual tricks." He went on to explain that old John was prison guard who loved to wake prisoners by banging his nightstick along the landing rails just to irritate them. Old John had been murdered by a prisoner in 1889. The officer went on to explain that when they hear Old John is about, they stay firmly in their landing office until the noise has finished. A guard raping a woman in her cell the whole while telling her that he didn't even find her attractive, and that no one would believe her due to how ugly she was. Conveniently, the camera footage for that night was lost. Like so many others. Not a prisoner, but my cousin worked for a long time as a doctor in prisons, and he said the worst thing he'd seen there was the result of an innocuous-sounding craft class. Apparently a guy was brought into his sick bay screaming his head off, with a metal crafting implement of some kind buried in his chest, and a colored pencil jammed in each eyeball. Former guard, not prisoner, but I have witnessed a gentleman stick his hand up his anus well past the wrist to extract feces and throw it against the wall, consume it. Most disturbing thing I have witnessed for sure. Not my story, but my dad's. A guy in his block was in on several life sentences, so basically never getting out. The dude's daughter was raped, and where should the rapist end up? But in the same cell block as the guy in for multiple life sentences. With nothing to lose, he told the guards, "If you don't move him, I'm going to have to deal with him myself." The guards having not listened, the rapist nor the murderer were moved. A week later, while everyone was going somewhere, can't remember the time of day, the rapist had his neck hacked at so hard by a fairly blunt but effective jail-style sword that it became almost fully detached. I'm not sure what happened with the dude who was in for life, but I'll ask in the morning. Ex-boyfriend did some time. He told me about the scariest thing to happen while he was in prison. Taking a shower, one other bloke in there at the time, when two other guys came in with some sort of blade and both attacked the other dude, completely opening up his back, blood everywhere. Ex-boyfriend jumps up on side of bathtub, I think it was a bathtub, to avoid blood. The two other dudes turned to him and said, "You saw nothing." Ex-boyfriend said he was shaking like a shitting dog. He was only 18 at the time. Guards came in promptly, other dude lived. Ex-boyfriend saw a guy get put into the industrial dishwasher for stealing someone's ramen noodles. Permanent brain, organ, and skin damage. They basically cooked him. Not prison, but county. Was doing 30 days. There was a guy locked up in one of the segregation cells by the cop's desk who would yell random stuff all through the night. Saw him through his window a few times during free time. This guy looked exactly like Saddam Hussein. His screaming would keep me up every night, though it was hard enough sleeping on a concrete slab with a blanket on it. Anyways, one night I woke up and noticed the screaming had stopped. A few moments later, an officer came by my cell and took away my sheets and pillowcase, leaving only those damn itchy recycled blankets made of horse pubes or something. Find out the next morning that the dude had hanged himself using his sheets and pillowcase as a rope. My brother has been in and out of jail prison for years. During one stay in a prison, the guy in the cell next to him was murdered for farting. His cellie strangled him to death. Former prison guard here. Most of my stories involve inmates doing things with their own poop. One guy in the mental ward made a chessboard out of poop. Most guys would make them out of toilet paper since they couldn't afford them. This guy was playing chess with his friend in the next cell, and would eat the pieces after he lost them or took them from his opponent. Another female inmate we had ripped a flap of skin open on her forearm and stuffed it with her own feces, in a non-poop related story. Another inmate, whose name I've forgotten, killed his cellmate in the middle of the night for having his TV up too loud. He proceeded to jam the antenna off the old television into his skull, stuffed his body into the plastic foot locker the inmates were given for their personal stuff, and set it on fire. This same inmate then, when in court for that murder, ripped out his own eyeball in the courtroom and threw it at the judge. He was batshit crazy. Years later, when I worked with him, he unknowingly tried to rip his other eyeball out while on solitary confinement. One of my lecturers at uni told my class once about a guy called Gary Webb, self-mutilating nutjob, who told a prison guard one night that he was going to cut his penis off. The guard said, "Not tonight, please, Gary. My shift is nearly over." So Gary did it the next night instead when the guard wasn't there. Not a prisoner, but my friend was. He saw a guy climbing a tall fence to escape. As the man was struggling with the barbed wire on the fence, he got tangled with the electrical wires from the electricity post and got electrocuted and fell off and died within the prison wall. My friend said the smell of burnt men is very unique. I worked for 5 years at a prison for the severely mentally ill. Countless times I've seen guys insert items into body cavities, slam their heads against the door, wall, and floor, slice their own wrists. And watched a guy in for raping young boys be beaten and stabbed to a point where he had to permanently wear a colostomy bag and spent 3 months in a hospital. The craziest was watching a guy insert a marker into his urethra. The nurse had to milk it out because it had grabbed on. I also witnessed a guy who inserted a hairbrush, bristles first, into his anus. My mother was a prison guard in a maximum security facility where most of the population was lifers. Needless to say, she's seen some shit from these people with nothing to lose. One time she was doing rounds and some dude shot his load on her through that little slot. Another time she found her name on a rape list while shaking cells. But the only time I've seen her shaken up by anything in there was the night that she found her first suicide. Guy had melted a blade from a razor into the end of a toothbrush and sliced himself ear to ear. She said the first thing that she noticed was the pool of blood outside the cell, and when she got in there was a line of blood about 6 feet high all around the cell. Apparently slicing your jugular releases a lot of pressure. She said the worst thing about it is that when she came in there, he was still alive. Breathing, wheezing, choking on blood. My mom's not a drinker, but that night she came home with a bottle of vodka and just drank it in silence. My buddy was locked up juvenile detention with a guy that decided to scrub my friend's toothbrush in his butthole. He ended up getting sores all over his mouth. The guard found out and let my buddy piss in the guy's milk at lunch. The guard probably stopped what could have been a pretty bad fight. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Write your similar stories in the comments. And also be sure to subscribe to our channel so as not to miss new super interesting videos, and I advise you to watch our other videos.